Okay, so we're now going to make our flap. So I have my exterior flap panel and I have my flap accent panel, and I've marked a line across the bottom, and you can choose which shape of panel of flap you want. You can either have the slightly pointed one or you can have the curved one. Exactly the same construction method, it's just a slightly different shape at the bottom. So I've cut mine and I've made a mark that is going across this bottom piece that is 1 inch from that corner. So 1 inch down from the corner, I've made a mark that goes across. I'm going to take my accent panel and I'm going to lay it above that, or just so that the bottom edge of my accent panel touches onto that that mark. Now don't worry that your accent panel is a little bit longer, it's fine. You're going to trim off what's left. And now we're going to top stitch that down. We haven't added any foam to this part yet, so I'm just going to top stitch from one side to the other using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to secure this in place. You don't need to back stitch at the end, because the ends of this will be caught in the seam allowance when we create the flap. There we go, and then I can just trim off any excess. Okay, so that's our accent panel attached to our exterior flap part. Now we are going to make our handle connectors. So what I've done is I've actually already done these. I've taken my connectors, I've made a line centrally from one end to the other, and this is the 2 3/4 inch measurement, not the 2 inch measurement. So this is a 2 3/4 inch line. Made it centrally, and I've pressed both raw edges into the center to create a 1 inch by 2 3/4 inch connector. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my strap and I'm going to have I'm going to do it this way so that my join is showing. But I'm going to take my connectors and I'm going to thread my connector through my rectangle ring, approximately 3/4 of an inch. It's a difficult one to give you an exact measurement because it will depend on how thick your hardware is. And I'm just going to pop a clip on that. You'll see when we actually fit this in a second that it's not an exact science, and you can kind of jiggle it a little bit to make it suit you. So now I've got a connector on each end of my handle, and that's as it should be. So next I'm going to add the foam to my flap exterior. So my handle is made, and now I'm just going to add the foam to my flap exterior in exactly the same way as I did with the body of the bag. My foam is a little bit larger. And I'm just going to sew baste using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Around the outside. to trim off the excess. Now we don't put the handle on until after we've put the foam on, because we need the extra stabilisation that the foam gives to secure our handle and stop it ripping the fabric. So you've got to remember that with a bag that's got a handle on the top, it's going to be those, wherever you connect your handle, it's always going to be a stress point. So you need a nice secure attachment, but you also need well stabilized fabric to attach it to. This isn't a massive bag, so you wouldn't fill this with bricks and what have you, so in theory it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But you also, the hardware that you use on the flap is also quite integral to this, because it's taking a lot of pressure, so it's worth using decent quality hardware as well, just to make sure that your bag has integrity and it's going to actually last when you use it. So I've now added the foam to my flap, and from the top edge of my flap I'm going to make a mark that is 4 inches. Let me just double check that I'm making a mark that's 4 inches. Yes, I am making a mark that's 4 inches. You know how you suddenly think, I know I wrote the pattern, but who knows, I could have forgotten. So I've made a mark that goes from one side to the other that is 4 inches from that top edge. And then I'm going to take my handle and I'm just going to kind of fold my hardware down and put my connectors sort of outwards. And depending on how thick your hardware is, your handle should sit perfectly so that the bottom edge is on that 4-inch mark. So if I put the strap connector right on the edge on both sides, my handle will sit, let me just raise that up so you can see, it sits so that the hardware is at sort of 90 degrees. Now, if your hardware is thicker, sort of chunkier, you may have to alter these little bits slightly. You may even have a little bit that's excess coming off the side, but I would just put more underneath if you need to. But that's pretty much how it should be. But it will depend very much on the thickness of your hardware. If it's a millimetre or two out, or 1/8 of an inch, then you will just need to adjust the strap connectors accordingly. So I'm very happy with that. I'm now going to stitch from the outside inwards on my connectors across, and then back out to the outside. I do like to try and flatten the hardware down before I do that, because it kind of gets in the way otherwise. If you wanted to put a little bit of glue underneath the connectors just to hold them in place, then you could do. I don't need it. I don't feel like I need it, so I don't. Now, if you're using faux leather for your connectors, do be aware that this can get quite thick when you come to actually construct your flap, which is why I'm using fabric for mine. If you've got an industrial machine, that's fine. If you don't mind the bulk, then that's fine. But I like to I market my patterns as being suitable for domestic machines, so I'm not going to suggest you do something that is actually not domestic machine friendly. Let me just find a ball, because I need to just hold on to that without my finger being in the way. And there we go. So I've come down, across and back out again. And I'm doing mine in fabric. These have been interfaced. they're perfectly strong enough. It works really well, and actually, because of my fabric being quite patterned, I'm using for my flap, you actually can't see them particularly. If you wanted to add a rivet through there, then you could do, if you felt that you wanted to. If you want to add more bling, I'm trying to create patterns that don't have too much hardware, because hardware is expensive. But if you wanted to, fill your boots. You're going to do exactly the same on the other side. And there we have our handle attached. And there you can see how that sits quite nicely on the top there. The hardware is at pretty much 90 degrees to the flap itself. So I'm just going to push my handle down so that it sits as flat as it can, because now I need to add my lining. So I'm going to lay my lining right sides together with my flat panel, and I'm just going to clip that in place. Just trying to match up all the corners and angles and edges. Now it can be a bit of a challenge because that is bulky, that handle, so you do need to just kind of make sure that you've got all the corners together. Okay, so I've clipped all the way around the outside. Let's just put one on the bottom there because I seem to have omitted that point. And on this top edge I've put clips. They're approximately 5 inches apart. Let me just see how good I am approximating. Look at that, perfect, 5 inches apart. And I'm not going to stitch that particular part. I'm only going to stitch around the outside of the rest of the panel. Let me just move on my pattern piece, because I'm just checking that I'm doing this in the right order. Yeah, I am. So we're going to top stitch around. We're going to stitch around the outside of our flap using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this occasion. And I know that the seam allowance is changing on this from one to another, from 3/8 to 1/4 inch. But if we pay attention, everything will be hunky-dory. So I'm just going to reduce my stitch length a little. A couple of back stitches at the beginning. And then It's important that you do try and stick to the seam allowance, because if you don't, then your strap won't look nice and symmetrical, which isn't a good look. I think this style of bag is all about the angles and the nice straps and what have you, and you want it to be symmetrical. If you feel that your handle is in the way there because you've moved it that way, you can at that point move it back across so that it's not in the way. It depends how thick your handle is and how tall, to be honest, your hardware is, because some D-rings are, some of the rectangle rings are a lot taller than others. Stitching at the end just to secure my threads, and we now have a sort of a sandwich with our handle in the middle. So what I'm going to do is, first things first, I'm going to remove the basting stitches that are attached to my foam, but I'm just removing them from the parts where I've actually stitched, so I'm not taking it out from that top part yet. Be careful you don't, that's not working very well. Let's get a seam ripper. And I've just literally gone into my stitching, so I'm just going to re-stitch that. Okay, let's do that again. So I'm just taking the basting stitches that were holding my foam in place out. Do this carefully. So once you've, oh, still got some there. Once you've removed the basting stitches, and actually at this point you can, if you mark between the start and finish of your stitching on the foam, you can remove that base stitching from the gap as well, because you're going to be able to then remove the foam from that gap. But you're going to remove the foam down to that line that you've marked, so that's 1/4 inch away from the top edge, it should be. So I'm just going to remove the foam from the seam allowance. that'll be the door. I don't know who that is. I hope somebody else is going to answer it. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Oh, husband's got presents. So we're just going to take that foam from the seam allowance, and I appear I've taught my stitching again. Look at that. I'm not very good at this, am I? Perhaps I need a bit more practice. So try and not catch your stitching with your scissors, but if you do, you can just go and restitch just where that's come adrift. That's what happens when you get new scissors and they're really sharp. There we go. So, having done that, we're now going to trim off those corners in the same way as we would if we had a pocket. All of the corners where you've got an angle, I'm just trimming off at approximately 45 degrees. And if you're making the curved flap, you will need to make little triangle notches in the curve to help that curve to ease when you turn your flap the right way out. Obviously I'm not doing a curved one, so I can't show you, but you know how to do the little flaps. I don't need to tell you that, you're not daft. In these corners we need to just cut out a little triangle that is close to the stitching as we can, but without cutting into the stitching. Let me just, if I cut that out, I can show you. So I've just taken that little bit of excess fabric out of that corner. I'm going to do the same thing in the other corner. And if you don't take enough, what you'll end up with is a pucker in the corner when you turn your flap the right way around. And there we have it. It's all ready to go. Now, if you feel like you've got extra bits in the seam allowance, like where you've got your if you've got extra bits of strap connector showing, you can trim those off. I wouldn't take the seam allowance down too much more than it already is. It's only at 1/4 inch now, so if you take it down too much, you'll end up with nothing to kind of hold the thing together. So I'm just going to put my hand in that hole at the top, and I'm just going to carefully turn my flap right sides out. Now you've got to remember you've got that handle on there, and that is a little bit stiff, but it is perfectly doable. You just need to be patient, and you're partly pushing and partly pulling. You know, I cut my stitching. Look at that. Oh, Christine. I'm going to turn that back in the right way, and I'm going to re-stitch that. I'll try that again. Just goes to show that we all do this stuff. And anybody says that ever says that they haven't cut through their stitches is telling you porky. It happens. I can tell everybody to be careful, but it doesn't matter how careful you are. Sometimes these things just happen. So use your fingers or a pointy tool of choice to kind of push out all those corners and all those angles. Be careful you don't push them out so far that you actually push the things right out of their the thing right through the stitching. And what you want to end up with is a 90-degree angle, not something where your corner comes out and it isn't at 90 degrees. If you push it too hard, you'll find that you end up with an angle that isn't actually an angle, it's almost a curve. So I'm just using a sort of a pointy pokey tool. Do be careful if you're using scissors. And again, I'd be happy to say that I never use scissors, but that'd be lying. I tend to use whatever's closest by, mostly my fingers, I think, but just push them out until you've got all the corners and the angles sitting nicely. Pressing mat. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to roll those side seams between my fingers to try and ensure that the lining is on the back of my flap. This is especially important at the sides where your connectors are, because you've got quite a lot of thickness at the front, even with fabric, and it will kind of almost, let me just see if I can show you, it will kind of almost pull the lining to the front, and you don't want the lining to show from the front. You want it to be on the back of the flap. Thank you. I'm going to do that all the way around into the places that I want it to make sure that we've got the lining where it needs to be. Sneezes from the other room. Right, and along this top edge, what we're going to do is we're going to fold the exterior fabric over the foam, and then we're going to fold the lining fabric in on itself. Again, the lining fabric should be on the reverse of your flap and not showing. I've got a piece of thread there that's going to annoy me. So I'm folding the front fabric over, the exterior fabric over my foam, and then making a small fold on the lining so that they match, and then clipping. So that should sit nicely, nice and smoothly, slightly wonky clips, but you shouldn't see any of the lining on the outside. Now, if you wanted to press this at this point, you can do. Do be careful though that you don't touch any of the faux leather. I like to just give it a bit of a little bit of a press just to make sure that I've got all those corners exactly right. But say, do be careful that you don't touch any of your faux leather accents, because irons and faux leather accents don't go together. Right, so having done that, I'm now going to top stitch around the outside, but I'm not going to do that top edge. I'm going to stitch from this corner all the way around the outside to this corner. The top edge we leave alone. Now I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for this. I will do a second line of top stitching at 1/8 of an inch, because that's just something I like to do. It's not mandatory, but I'm going to. Right, so that's once, and then I'm gonna go around and do a second line of stitching at 1/8 of an inch, because I like to. What might have been more sensible was to put a larger needle in here. I've still only got a 14, and I would usually use the 16 for this part, but I forgot. So trim off any thread ends. And our flap is done. We just need to add our hardware, which we'll come back to shortly.